Hey everyone, Geophysicist Stefan Burns here. We have just sustained a historic solar storm impact here on Earth, which could have been a lot worse given certain magnetic field configurations. We were very lucky yesterday because if the magnetic field was negative instead of positive, to keep it simple, we would have had for sure the strongest solar storm impact going back at least to 2003 and more likely going all the way back to 1989. Regardless, this was a near Carrington class impact based off of the magnetic field strength of this solar storm. Also, the velocity of this solar storm coming in at about 1,200 kilometers per second and then sustaining its velocity at 1,000 kilometers per second for a long duration in time. And the only reason this wasn't stronger and that we had no power grid failures and no aurora down to the equator was the fact that we had a strongly positive interplanetary magnetic field in the vertical direction, a positive BZ component rather than a negative BZ component, which allows for that interplanetary magnetic field carried by this solar storm and all that plasma to connect nicely to Earth's magnetic field and therefore inject that energy into our plasmasphere, creating stronger geomagnetic volatility. So we got very lucky last night, but it is looking like our luck may run out because we could have another significant solar flare launch from the sun over the next 24, 48, 72 hours, and maybe that one won't have such a positive magnetic field configuration. If it launches a coronal mass ejection out, it will be Earth direct. Here we see the sunspots in question. There's that 1.9 X-class flare, long duration. Another important thing to keep in mind as it relates to these solar flares is the overall duration of the flare, the amount of energy it releases overall. It scales logarithmically, so if you're at a high designation for a long period of time, the amount of energy is much more than a similar intensity, but for a very short duration. But if you watch here, you'll notice a lot of activity just now picking up in the past few hours, and that sort of crackling electrical activity is usually a sign that we're about to have something pop off. So that is not guaranteed, but I think that's probably going to occur. At least I think that's more likely to occur than not. If you're wondering what that object is racing across the sun at the beginning, that is the moon. That is because we had the new moon on the 18th. So we had that historic 1.9 X-class solar flare right there, super long duration. Then we get our new moon, and then that coronal mass ejection hit us about 30 hours later, and thankfully it had a positive magnetic field component. We can look at the magnetic volatility created from this solar storm. Let's check it out right here using our HB 30 index for the past 24 hours. This was right when we first started getting the impact. We immediately went up to values of 10. So the HB 30 and HB 60 indices are like the KP index. These are all measures of geomagnetic activity based off of the magnetic field swings measured at the surface from a global network of magnetometers. And the magnetic field is this force field that protects our planet. Earth has a magnetic field, but a lot of things in our solar system don't. Most moons, only Ganymede around Jupiter has a magnetic field. Venus doesn't have a magnetic field being generated within it. Mars doesn't have a magnetic field, only regional crustal anomalies. Thankfully, we have a magnetic field, or else this would have been a very powerful impact of plasma to our planet. Well, we see this come in. This went up to 10. The KP index caps out at 9. The HB and HB 30, HB 60 indices, they can go beyond that. So we see that this was at G5 plus levels there for an entire hour as that initial shock wave came in, which did have a negative BZ component value to it. So it had a negative vertical component. And as a result, it created this really extreme shock, sent us immediately up into G5 plus levels, but then it flipped positive. You see we cooled off here down to G2 levels, G2 plus. Then we strengthened back up to G4 levels, and now we are still in elevated activity, but we are starting to go down to G3, G2, and G1 levels at this moment in time, and the solar storm is coming to a close. So we can look at our real-time solar wind right here to get a sense of that, and we see that we are still in an S1 radiation storm. We're still in a G2 geomagnetic storm, but this is starting to cool off. We see that we had totally normal conditions right before this came in. There was an equipment malfunction here, so you can't take these velocity values as accurate, but in general, it was getting very, very slow, about 400, 350 kilometers per second. But look here, we immediately leapt up to values of about 1,000 plus as it started to come in. And now we're in a low density part of this solar storm in the wake left by it. This specifically is important. High velocity, low solar wind density, below 1 particle per cubic centimeter is what we look at for high magnitude earthquake activity. We're in that right now. And we just had a massive magnetic shock wave and flux event effectively occur, creating a lot of instability in the Earth, telluric currents, ionospheric anomalies, ionospheric currents, the plasmasphere, ion precipitation. I could go on and on. So here we see the shock wave from that. You see that we went up to G5 minus levels right there with 8.67 of the KP index. But look at this. We had our interplanetary magnetic field go up to a value of 90. If we look at this closely, we can see just how extreme this was. So we see that we had this initial shock right here that went to some crazy levels up in the 90 nanotesla range as well. You see that dot right there. Right now, when I'm selecting and zooming in on this, it's totally blanking out. So there's some data processing, I guess, that needs to occur on their end. But we see that we reached values of 90 nanotesla. This is not unprecedented, but we almost never see this. So this, in terms of its magnetic field, was at Carrington levels, but we see that we had our positive BZ component. If that had been strongly negative, this would have been the strongest storm, at least since 1989. We would have had widespread power grid outages, I think. Aurora down to the equator. It would have been an historic event. So thankfully, our sun was benevolent in sending us a positive BZ solar storm, because while, yeah, the aurora would have been cool, it would have had widespread technological problems, satellite failures, telecommunication issues, more widespread radio blackouts, GPS would have stopped working. So we really got lucky last night. Like, we got incredibly lucky. And we should all be happy that this played out the way it did in terms of that positive BZ component, because we don't know how it would have resulted if that had not been the case. And we're still at very high solar wind velocity right now. We're still at 900 kilometers per second. We are cooling off. The interplanetary magnetic field at 20 is 4 times stronger than normal at 5. But we are starting to basically reach more normal levels. We're likely to see G1 and G2 geomagnetic storming going forward now for the next 24 hours or so. And we could get that double impact if we get another big solar flare launch out. And if it makes a similar transit time of 30 hours or less, then we could be looking at another second big wallop. And that one may not be as benevolent. Here we see our proton flux. We had a historic level get reached here, an S4 radiation storm, first time since the 2003 Halloween storms. We've never actually categorized and hit an S5 level since this data started being collected. So that would have been a first, and we got fairly close to it. We needed to go up to 100,000, and we didn't. So we got close, but not all the way there. It did not trigger a ground level enhancement because we did not have these extremely energetic, greater than 500 megaelectron volt protons get enhanced from this. So it was a softer spectra, you could say, but it did trigger the strongest radiation storm in 20 years. And when you're looking at this, when it's spiking up, you have the event, the coronal mass ejection impact right as it peaks, and then it goes down. So that's what we're seeing very clearly here. So that's cooling off now. We'll leave S1 levels soon. Probably within 24 hours, we'll be back below the warning threshold. And while there'll still be heightened flux probably for a few days, we'll be out of that really critical, severe S4 proton radiation storm that has effectively been ongoing. We have our X-ray flux here. We can see that the sun has been active with flare activity even since that 1.9 X-class flare. We see that right there, long duration, but a lot of crackling and just in general activity right there. And we can see that with our sun intensitygram here, if we look at that. So check this out. Here we have our sunspots on the sun past 48 hours. You'll notice a bunch of new flux push out here, and there's a couple jumps in this. But this is where we're getting this arcing now in between these two sunspot groups. And all of a sudden you see a bunch of solar flux and sunspot growth right here as well in the northern hemisphere. Also there, I mean, across the entire Earth facing side of the sun right now, we're having a huge amount of of new flux push out. So that's why I think it's likely we get another big solar flare from this. It could be a high M-class flare, long duration. It could be an X-class flare, long duration. We don't know where it's going to go. But things are more complex now on the sun and looking more agitated than they were before that long duration 1.9 X-class flare. So we could just be at the beginning of a broader event in time as it relates to historic solar activity. That's certainly possible. It's not out of the question. We have our coronagraph here, and we'll see a couple interesting things if we look at our coronagraph. This shows us what's happening with solar storm outflows, solar wind. We see the planets here. Mars, Mercury, Venus. Mercury's about to do its superior conjunction. These are all on the far side of the sun. By the way, I also had what I think may be like a prophetic dream last night. It was really intense. I'll share that in a separate video. I need to do a little bit more research into what I saw in my dream to kind of maybe get a sense of the dates, because there were some very clear things that lined up. So I think maybe February we have something happening. But that was wild. If you want to stay up to date on that, or you want to hear what I had this dream of, then make sure to subscribe to the channel. I'll be releasing on the next couple of days or so, just a few things I need to check out first. But I saw these planets in my dream, which is why I mentioned that. So there's something about these planets as it relates to solar activity and what we just experienced. All those particles right there, that is that S4 proton radiation storm. You see that it's backed off now, it's cooled off, but we could be seeing another big halo coronal mass ejection come off the sun very, very soon. I would put more chips on that than it not happening. So we'll just have to wait and see. And looking at recent earthquake activity, we have two places really to look at closely. As I was doing the live stream last night, we had a magnitude 4.9 earthquake strike Southern California, right near the San Andreas Fault. There's been a huge amount of swarming that has occurred there since. So if you load up all the earthquakes on the map, 211 earthquakes have popped off since that 4.9, and we can see that right here. So this was a big earthquake, one of the largest in California in some time. We had the Susanville quakes that were similar at 4.9, 4.7. We had the magnitude 6 up here off the coast of Oregon, right near Northern California, less than a week ago. And so it looks like California is waking up, and these sort of earthquake swarms often precede higher magnitude earthquake activity. So right now we have had a 4.9, and all the other earthquakes have been less than magnitude 4, which is more indicative of it being an aftershock sequence. For example, if this had been a 4.9 and then like a 4.5, a 4.3, a 4.7, and that's the sequence in time, then we really be looking like, okay guys, something bigger is coming with a much higher confidence. But still, just in general, these sort of earthquake swarms often are foreshock sequences. So that is something to be aware of, and if you live in this area, to be mindful of, to be prepared for, because California is overdue in a lot of locations. We also had this 4.1 here back on the 15th. So there has been some activity in California, but nothing like magnitude, 8 earthquakes or anything. That's the top limit, we think, for the San Andreas, unless some larger geologic factor plays in. We've had an earthquake swarm here with Kilauea. So after the last eruptive episode, we started having earthquake swarming, and now we're starting to see with the tilt data that there seems to be some sort of narrowing down of the magma chamber, getting more compressed and erupting more often. So there seems to be some changes occurring on the Big Island, Hawaii, as it relates to the volcanic system there, and we could have the next eruptive episode within the next 24, 48 hours based off of the tilt data. So there's a lot happening right now. We covered a lot of that in last night's live stream, so this is just an intermittent update for you all in between what's been happening effectively. We can look at the magnetic field fluctuations that are occurring right now on the globe. We see that we still have a lot of magnetic flux occurring at this moment in time. So that is not only affecting the Earth geophysically and her energy systems, it also affects us and our energy systems bioelectrically. So just do what you can to stay calm, cool, relaxed. Check in with your nervous system, right? Like do an actual check-in. Do some belly breathing, the yogi belly breath, the baby breath, and just kind of feel where you are with your nervous system, with your energy, with your mind. And then you can use that information to perhaps make better decisions going forward. If you're more aware of yourself and your internal environment, then you'll have a better impact on your external environment too, and be probably just in general a better person. So That is your update for today. I may be back on later tonight with another update, especially if you get a big earthquake or solar flare. I'm your guy. I release videos almost daily, and when things happen, I try to get on live as soon as possible. You can follow me for updates in between my videos on my X account. This is at Stefan Burns Geo. It's linked in the video description. You can also watch me or listen to me on Spotify too. That's also linked in the video description. So thank you all so much for watching. Smash that like button. Help the channel grow. It really does make a difference. And if you'd like to learn more about what's happening with the Earth energetically, earthquakes, volcanoes, severe weather, solar activity, space weather, planetary resonances, interstellar forces, all this and much more, then I'm your guy. Hope to see you around. Wishing each and every single one of you well. Please take care of yourselves. I'll see you all in the next video.